It's time for Booting Up. Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great week. Awesome hump day. Tonight, we are talking to a guest who is a senior software engineer, about to start at a startup, but was at Slack, Yelp before, and went to Hack Reactor. So we're about to get into her story in just a minute, but if it's your first time here, make sure to hit the subscribe button and leave a like after the show if you enjoy it or if you learn anything new. And if you do, also share it with a friend. You know, we want to make sure that everyone coming out of bootcamp has a support network and has some resources to learn from. But without further ado, let's bring on Laura.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Laura, how's it going? You're in Aspen right now, huh?
I am in Aspen. I got some skiing in today.
Nice.
Yeah.
You have like a house there? Is this like a long-term stay or?
No, I've been skiing all over this season because of COVID. And it's like a thing you can do that's in the United States. So we're staying in the bottom of the hill. And we were in Jackson for New Year's, so we've been doing skiing all over.
Living the life. And like that, so I guess that's something you've been doing for a while though, because like I know I was checking your LinkedIn and seems like you were a big time traveler, right?
Yeah, I have traveled a lot. So I originally studied abroad in college as well as taking a gap year. So I lived in France for a year and then did a semester in Hong Kong, a semester in Seoul, and then did internships in Paris and London.
Literally all over.
Literally all over. But my Cantonese and Korean is very bad, and my French is quite good.
Well, I don't even have even the slightest hint of any of those languages. So you're way ahead of me already.
Good. No testing me.
Yeah. And then would you grow up? Like what was like your hometown?
Yeah, Kansas City was my hometown. So very different. So I'm very Midwestern. My parents are from the South. So very sort of different background than I think most people who are in software engineering. But I lived a very sort of suburban childhood and outside of Kansas City.
And this is Kansas City, Kansas, or this Kansas City, Missouri?
Missouri. Oh my goodness, this is the question everyone asks. So the complicated answer is Kansas, but like not in Kansas City, Kansas. So nobody actually really lives in Kansas City, Kansas. It's like actually a pretty small area. A lot of people live in Kansas City, Missouri, and then the suburb of Kansas City, Missouri is in Johnson County, Kansas. So it's like the Johnson County is a big place where people live. But on the Kansas side.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it's not something I'll probably get wrong again, but at least I learned.
No, it's fine. It's spanned the border for a long time. Kansas City, Missouri has been around for longer than Kansas City, Kansas. So.
Oh, geez, over there.
Yeah.
So when you're going and you're traveling abroad this whole time, like initially you were focused on going an international studies route. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I thought that I was going to go into law. So I originally majored in political science and international relations with a focus on like economic policy. That's the reason I was studying abroad so much. The reason I was like focusing on French as a language, because it's the other language used at the UN besides English. So I was very focused on that. After college, I decided to go be a law clerk at a large law firm working in court procedures. So essentially what I did was for really like intense high profile litigations, I would help attorneys focus on like the timelines and like when to file things and like do all their filings for them and help them with their early briefs and doing proofreading and that type of thing. And while there, everyone seemed pretty miserable. I mean, like very miserable. And so every attorney would I think they all thought they were doing it individual. I think they thought they were all individuals and that they were the only one doing this, but each and every single one, even ones I never interacted with, would like randomly have these conversations with me being like, okay, well, you cannot be a lawyer. Like you can choose a different life. You haven't gone to law school yet. You're about to go to law school and we'll like do something else. Like it's not a good path, just because of the way the business of litigation works right now. The field itself is quite interesting, but the business side of it is pretty brutal. And so they were encouraging me to kind of look elsewhere.
So that was the original plan, though. So you plan to become a lawyer after all this. It was like basically like work first and then go to law school.
Yeah, exactly. It was like a final make sure that I felt excited still about being a lawyer after having worked in the field for a couple of years, and to give me like a little bit of time to study for the LSAT. And so it kind of like worked for both, like two birds, one stone.
All right. So I guess like your coworkers kind of saved you. But what made you go specifically to software engineering?
Yeah, so for me, I had chosen San Francisco after college, which was kind of a somewhat non-traditional track to choose for what I was generally interested in. It really sort of stemmed from during the financial crisis. Bloomberg had like, I was reading Bloomberg Weekly, and every single page was like doom and gloom and everything's going really badly. And then they had a spread that was all cartoons and said, meanwhile, in Silicon Valley, and it literally had a unicorn like jumping across the spread. It was like really very fun, and it really stuck with me. And so I was like deciding on where I wanted to live after college. And I was like, I don't know. I feel like San Francisco might be like the place. It feels very creative. And although I want to go into law, like I like being around other people who are interested in, and in building things, and creating things. And so that's why I chose San Francisco. And then once you live in that environment, especially like that was 2013, like it's impossible not to have all of your friends be in tech. It
just sucks you in.
Yeah, it just sucks you in. Like everyone is either in tech or supporting tech in some way. I was working specifically on like litigations that related to tech companies. And so I just was like immediately pretty immersed in the world. And it always felt like I was in some ways a very like well-paid janitorial service in law. Like I was just constantly like cleaning up messes that I did not make myself. And it felt like when I was talking with my friends that they were always like building something new and creating something new. And so that really that drew me to the field. I think ultimately the difference between law and tech is pretty I think that there are a lot of transferable skills. There are like a lot of understanding of the way that things are constructed, like
logic, a lot
thinking. Yeah, exactly. And being able to craft things in that way is beneficial to both fields. So that's like where that sort of transition started.
Interesting. So then going to like software engineering, like, did you have an initial plan, like how you're going to break in, or like what pushed you towards the bootcamp route?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could have gone and gotten my master's and like gone that route. At the time I felt like Hack Reactor was like the place that I really wanted to be, and I wanted it to be somewhat quickly. And the issue is if I wanted to have gone my master's, I would have had to do all my prereqs. I had zero prereqs, except for like one class in Java that I took in college. So there was just like, it would have taken me like 3 years, which would have been essentially a law degree. So it was just
back
like,
at square one.
I wanted to be a much tighter timeline. And so what I did was I did the MIT OpenCourseware on like data structures and algorithms.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Just to like make sure that I was sure that I wanted to do this. And like if it is hard to study on your own, like without any support. Like when you're 23 and everyone's going out and like you don't want to, you know what I mean? And I am like sitting there doing a class, like while I'm also working, a 60-hour week. It's like a very time consuming. And so the idea was if I could finish that, then I would go to Hack Reactor.
So how long did that take you to finish?
I did it within like what would be a semester, so within the timeline that they prescribed. I think that there's like a
time, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's something that's important about having momentum and consistency, because you have to constantly like relearn things that you theoretically already knew, but then you forget and you're kind of back to square one. You really need that like continuous like education and continuous learning.
Yeah, so the boot camp kind of gave you that structure and made you kind of build momentum further because you have someone kind of holding you accountable. You're putting your money on the line also. So
exactly.
And then how long was your boot camp? Was it like a 6-month one, 3-month?
3-month. So it was a bit. Hack Reactor at the time was I don't know what it is exactly now. I think it's still similar. It was like a month and a half of pre-course work. So you could still work and have it. It was similar to like what I was doing prior. So you would do the pre-course work for a month and a half, then you do 3 months, and then you're on the job market. But I ended up staying 3 months after as what was called a hacker in residence. And so you are essentially, I was in charge of mentoring students during their time while in their pre-course work and doing interviews. So like I did like, yeah, exactly. I was exactly like a TA.
Yeah. So you did that. You were the TA after the program finished.
Yes.
So when did you finish the program? What month and year?
Oh my God. It was in November and it was over 5 years ago. So I think 2016. No, 2015. November of 2015.
November 2015. Okay. So coming out of boot camp, like where was your head at? Were you like, hey, like I'm ready to rock and roll? Or are you like,
no, I was freaking out like everyone else. No. So I there were a few things. So I had a really good support system from like friends and family, a lot of people I knew who were engineers who knew me quite well, and really gave me some strong advice about not staying in web development and moving to iOS. And so I essentially was like, I basically had to redo Hack Reactor during my hacker in residence. So I wasn't just being a TA and like doing interviews. I was also doing Stanford 193P, which is basically the capstone course that people in the Bay Area, if you want to learn how to do iOS programming, this is the course you take. And everyone from Stanford grads to me are taking it, and Paul Haggerty puts a new one up every fall, and that's how you learn iOS programming. And so what I did was I kept a consistent schedule of working on that while I was also, and Stanford's on the quarter system. So theirs is actually 3 months long, their classes. So it actually stacked up very nicely. So while I was a hacker in residence, I was doing this and I was studying and doing projects so that my resume was actually an iOS resume and not a web development one.
Interesting. And so like going from like web development to iOS, like what would you say is the biggest difference? Was it like really hard or was it?
Yeah, I mean, I that's hard. I don't know how to say this in the right way. I just think iOS development is harder than like web development, because it is much closer to the metal. You have to understand memory management. I'm not walking uphill both ways anymore. You have something that's called ARC, which is what the system does. It weaves in the allocation and deallocation of the memory, but you have to do a lot more networking stuff. You have to have more intimate knowledge about like how the hardware of an iPhone works. You're having to deal, like, I think maybe what would be considered easier is that you have a sandbox. You're operating only in the iOS ecosystem, and what is really difficult about web development is not just getting it to work on Google Chrome, it's getting it to work on Internet Explorer, whatever.
Safari,
yeah. So yeah, it was difficult. But I think that, like anything, it's about consistency, and it's about like continually checking in with what the material is. And I'm not saying that in a way that's like, oh, it's harder to learn, and so I learned it. It's more like, anyone who's like passionate about engineering can learn about any other form of it. I've had to do some backend when I was at Yelp. I did like a 4-month deputyship working on the Yelp main backend for the mobile API. And anyone can learn these things. It's about having the like stick-to-itness, and being dogged and being committed to learning new things. And I think that that's how engineering, like how you excel in engineering, is not being too focused on one platform, but really being open to learning.
No, that makes sense. And like a couple of things you mentioned that I didn't think about before. So one, like how many things you have to consider. Like I always thought like iOS is kind of more simple because you kind of, like you said, you have one platform that you're building for. But I guess that is true. You're working with something that is expected to work at a faster speed than on web. I think on web there's more kind of leeway in terms of how fast something is. And then also, you get like intimate with this one platform. So I feel like the work you produce also ends up coming out better. Do you get a sense?
Yeah. I mean, there are some people doing some amazing stuff in web development, so I don't want to in any way poo-poo that. But I mean, a native platform, it just feels right. It doesn't like lag. It doesn't have issues that are the same way. It's the reason that the startup I'm joining, I'm rewriting their app that's currently in React Native to fully native, and that's because it has a video streaming component. There's a lot of sort of animations, these type of things. Just, just having something that feels tangibly right. I can't tell you exactly why it feels right. It just works much more quickly. The interactions are not sort of like, Facebook's interpretation of what Apple has like created. Which is essentially what React Native is. It's some people who are highly intentional, that are saying like, this is how we believe an application should work. This is the way we believe that a phone should act. And so there's just, I think, intention with iOS applications is one of the things that I enjoy so much about the platform. What's sad about that is that you really need to spend some time gaining some expertise in order to, like, the barrier to entry is much higher than in web. Whereas web, what's great is it's Wild Westy. Like, everyone can just like open up their console and like see what's what. Yeah. And like, and so it gets people more involved. It makes people more curious and think about what they're building. And so engineering is about trade-offs, and life is too. And that's, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like you mentioned, like it's kind of a harder entry. So you said everyone told you to go to iOS, and that's why you ended up going there. So like once you actually started searching for a job, did you notice it was like harder to find iOS positions versus web, or opposite?
I think that there are drawbacks on both of it. There are less iOS jobs, but the ones that are needed are maybe much more hard to like find for. So it's a smaller pool but there are just less iOS engineers, and so the competition is a little bit not less fierce, but it's just there are less of them. So I think that for the interview process, that was an interesting experience. I think that my experience would be slightly different than people looking for a web job, but not that much, because it was like my first engineering job. Every employer is taking a chance on whoever their hire is. Their first engineering job. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, I said, it's always a risk hiring someone junior. You don't have anything to go by, and that's why it's hard to break into tech. But there's definitely some sort of some plans going around, including one that I'm leading, to try to get companies to trial people instead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but one thing, so with iOS, I know the only bootcamp I know that had a program was Lambda, and they had iOS engineering, but they actually stopped it like 6 months ago or 8 months ago.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So why do you think that most boot camps don't have dedicated programs to that?
Um, because so I guess backing up to why I chose Hack Reactor in the first place, Hack
Mhm.
Reactor, I picked it because it had a solid foundation in engineering principles and not just,
Mhm.
um,
Like
not
more like
just web
CS.
development. Yeah, exactly. And I felt like the people out of that program who've always been the most successful are the ones who are less focused on like JavaScript trivia and more about like the larger picture of like building applications, building like engineering principles. And so you have to teach some you would have to teach in a boot camp those principles in order to get somebody hired, and then after that teach them iOS programming. So I don't think like in order to be a really like successful iOS engineer, I think that you need to have like a solid foundation. You can't just like open up like the console and sort of like tool around. You really need to have a solid like foundation in order to understand what is going to be like the changes that are being made. Because the thing with Apple is that it often as a platform, they're really willing to like kill stuff. Like, your phone
Features
jack.
or
Yeah, like, remember like the phone jack and they took everyone's phone
yeah.
jack away and everyone was very all up in arms and it was a big doings and then nobody cared. They do that with their programming as well. They're like, they'll take away tools or they'll change the SDK and it's like, just deal with it. And like, you have to have like a solid foundation to understand more than just like the iOS ecosystem. You need to understand like what is like the like zooming out, what is their vision and why are they doing these different things. And so I think that boot camps probably would probably have a hard time doing all of that within 3 months. 6 months, yes. I mean, I did it in 6 months. It's possible, but it's hard.
Yeah, because the curriculum also you have to update it constantly because there's stuff
Yeah,
coming out.
yeah.
So that makes more sense. So going into the interview process, so you kind of learned your iOS stuff. That took you how long again?
3 months.
3 months. Okay. So then right now we're looking at where are we in the timeline? This is February 2016.
Yes, February 2016.
All right. And then so at that point, is that when you're like, all right, now I'm launching the job search or
Yes,
okay.
immediately.
so,
uh,
so what was that like and how long did it take you to get a job?
It took me a month to get a job.
Okay.
It was, I mean, like, it was incredibly difficult. I like everyone else, like getting your first job in any field, like you are essentially asking
You're
an
outsider.
employer to take a chance on you. And like they're agreeing not for the value add that you currently have. And they're agreeing that like you have the capacity to learn and become the engineer that they want you to be. Like,
Mhm.
I think that that's something that new grads are less understanding of. I think that there's an idea that, oh, I have to have all of this knowledge. And then once I have all this knowledge, then I'll get hired. Or if I have this knowledge, I will get hired. Ultimately, there's so many things that go on to being an engineer in a large company that they're instead agreeing, hey, I believe that you want to learn and are teachable and that you
Yeah.
will be like a good value add and you're a good culture add and like all these different things that are non-tangible. So I think that like your enthusiasm for learning is one of the most important things to convey in an interview, and will get you so far. I mean, I have done more interviews than I think most engineers because I also did interviewing at Hack Reactor, and there I did 20 hours interviews a week. So I have interviewed more people than probably any person I've met in tech. And that, so for me as an interviewer, that is the most important thing. So I essentially went in with this sort of idea, like this as a hypothesis, and tested it out, and it definitely is proven true. I applied to, I think it was like 65 jobs, which now I hear candidates are like doing like hundreds, which I can't even imagine that.
Like 500, like
Oh my
1,000.
God. Yeah, that's not the world I lived in. Just because the market was different. A lot of things were different. It was 2016, and it was pre-COVID, and like pre a bunch of boot camps putting a ton of candidates out. So yeah, and I was doing iOS, so there was just so many things that like sort of differentiated me. But ultimately, like the same truth of once I get to an on-site, the truths that I experience are the same truths that everyone experiences, that you must craft a narrative as to why you're sitting there in their office, like talking to them about like being an engineer. You have to like demonstrate knowledge, but also be interesting and interested. Those are the way of putting it.
I like that.
You really need to convey that. Every opportunity that you have to do that is important. And that was like the key to my interviews. And also, I had another offer besides Yelp that I was never going to take because it was just too low. But nobody else knows that. Like, you have an offer in hand, and like hold that dear and precious. It makes you significantly more desirable because you've all of a sudden somebody else is giving you a stamp and said, we want her. And like, if you have that, let everyone else know, because then they all of a sudden now are like, oh, well, somebody else like finished this process with her and is like really stoked, so I should do the same thing, and like move her along. So I understand, like, when you have, little golden tickets, they make a difference.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Like we always want what we don't have or we can't have. And in that case, like even if you get a offer at a company you don't like I guess you leverage that to get into a company you do like.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Exactly.
that's smart. It's smart.
Yeah.
So then you started your first year at Yelp. Like, what were some of the biggest difficulties to adjusting to an actual job?
I think that, oh, that's hard. I joined a startup inside of Yelp that was for their reservations platform. At the time, it was called SeatMe, and it was an acquisition. So I was in this sort of like skunkworks project inside of Yelp. And so you had the benefits of being at Yelp that was like a larger organization, but and like funding and all of that. But you also had like the freedom and lack of structure that is similar to a startup. And I think that lack of structure was very hard for me, especially coming from law. Everything's highly structured. I mean, I literally, my previous job was giving people structure, and saying,
huge transition for you.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm like going to this world where it's like, I don't know. And like the PM hasn't told us what to make, and so I spent like 2 weeks creating a style guide for everyone, so like, and like centralizing all their colors and like just finding out what to do. I felt like the first year was kind of like me figuring out like how to exist in that type of world, and it's always been the thing I've struggled with most. And so if I were to give advice, if you have like 2 offers in hand and one's at a bigger organization and one's at like a startup, and you're in the position that I was 5 years ago, you should go to a bigger organization. You need to learn from people. You need mentorship. Like this first job you have out, the most important thing is your learning. You will contribute to the organization. You'll have things that you could be like, hey mom, I built that. But ultimately, like the thing that is most important is to have a solid foundation so that you can figure out what you want to do next. Because right now you're in like, wartime mode, which is get a job. And
anything, yeah.
Yeah. And then, then you can sort of like suss out like, okay, how do I feel about these different things? What are the different types of orgs I like? Where do I thrive? Where do I learn? Yeah.
No, that's true. Like I always say also, yeah, like you want a bigger company if you can, it's not obviously possible for everyone. Like when I came out of college, like I worked at American Express, and they have 150K employees. So
Mhm.
I was literally just like learning so much on the job and just like applying my learning right away. And I had time to do that because there was, there's not like a
Yeah.
startup where it's like, are you like you're not producing something today, then like you're falling behind already.
Yeah, exactly. You need that space to explore, and I think that's so important. Yeah.
So you're working at like this internal startup, but Yelp should have been pretty big at that time, though, no? Or was
Mhm.
this you
We're
working
like
at the
500
internal
engineers.
subsidiary?
It was like so there's a type of like department that's called a GM model. And
Okay.
so it's like they have a general manager who is essentially like the CEO of this like internal startup inside of a larger company. So they report to the CEO. They report like they also their director of like or VP of engineering will report to the CTO, but they're kind of like operating in their own sort of world.
Mhm.
And it's essentially more like a startup inside of the company.
Gotcha. Okay, so you work inside the startup for about 3 years. The whole 3 years were in that department.
No, I ended up yes, I did end up in that department, but I was originally working on the iPad app. So it's reservations. There's a front of house management system similar to what you would see on OpenTable, but this was the first iPad version of it,
Mhm.
and it was like running the front of house app. So that was for me the lack of structure that I really didn't enjoy,
Gotcha.
because the app was like literally the definition of legacy code. Like, I mean, it was
C code?
like legacy code. It was just like
Oh, legacy. Okay.
written, uh, it was just like 2,500 line files everywhere. Like, and like completely unable, like unorganized. It's all over the place. And there were some really, really smart people who were breaking that down and who were bringing it up to like where it should be. But it was like really needed some tender love and care. And so, when I had the opportunity to move to the main Yelp app, like their flagship mobile application, I
Mhm.
jumped at that. And so then I went and worked on that for 2 years. And
That
that
was
is
more
where I
structured.
really feel it. Yeah. It's where I learned how to be an iOS engineer. Really, like it's where I learned good habits, good hygiene, good ways of thinking about problems, having that support, having an infrastructure team that I could like talk to. They're a really sort of the infrastructure team at Yelp has been around that application for nearly since its inception. And that app has been in the App Store since the first App Store. So they know what they're doing. That is a really, really well run organization. And that's really where I felt like I learned the most. Yeah.
Happy to hear you actually found the structure in the end. You weren't lost too long.
I mean, I'm joining a startup now, so I'm fine. I can end
You're
up,
back to it.
kind of doing that, but I'm just trying to give advice for people who are early in their career.
Yeah.
It's like you can go and be off book later on and like enjoy that, but you want to create a solid foundation so that you can make like good choices
Mhm.
long term. For you don't want to be the person who's creating that legacy code that then Laura has to look at and like and struggle with.
Yeah.
Like you want to like
You don't need that.
yeah, like
So after Yelp, like what kind of triggered you? Like, hey, like I'm ready to move on to something new. Was it just a recruiter messaging you, or was it something specific that you're like, all right, it's time for something fresh?
I mean, I don't know how to like say this. It's like my stock, like like the stock was not doing well at Yelp, and it was
Oh,
a
okay.
constant roller coaster every quarter, and that's pretty well publicized. And I don't feel like I'm the only person who has ever said that. Yeah, it was like it's a great product. I really enjoyed working there, but ultimately like your conveyance of the value add to the world or value add to people's lives, if you cannot convey that properly to key investors, and meet metrics or exceed metrics, which is something that I learned a lot about, which is like your you might set guidances, but there are a lot of internal guidances that investors have. That might, that like if you don't meet their like super secret like internal guidance, then your stock crumbles. Like even if you already set different expectations, so like going to a company that has a sort of like two-way street, and not only that, not based on ads, like a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, their decisions are made based on advertising, and trying to keep people on their platforms as long as they can, whether that's good for the user or not. And so the combination of those two things made me want to join a different company. And Slack was pre-IPO at the time. My fiance was working there, but he's in a very different org. He's in the security operations org. So I've only been in a meeting with him once, which is always a bad thing, because it's like if I'm in like a meeting to discuss like a security meeting, like there's something that's gone terribly wrong on my end. Thankfully, it wasn't my fault, but like, I rarely get to see him actually when I was at Slack. But and he referred me and said that I should check it out. And the combination of being pre-IPO and not being ads based revenue was very attractive to me. So when you start to get picky, like when you have the ability to start becoming incredibly picky about where you want to go, like going to a place that does not have ads revenue as like their primary like flagship way they make money, is what I would recommend. Just because, ads force companies to make decisions that I don't always agree with, but I mean, to each their own.
Yeah, it's a kind of tricky area to work in. Like you see it with like Facebook on a lot of trouble this past year. And just, I kind of agree with you saying. It just, you don't want to be involved in that, because your company can kind of get shot in the foot, or it can skyrocket, but you don't want to deal with variability. If you're looking for variability, you can go to startup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So working at Slack, like before you got into there, so I know you had the kind of connection first, you got a referral, but what was like the interview process like? Did they make you do anything crazy that was different compared to the first time around looking for a job?
No, I mean, it was definitely more, it was different because I was interviewing for a senior position, and so it's just more rigorous. But I ended up, their process is very like reasonable and straightforward. It's essentially like a tech phone screen, and then you have a project, and then you have an onsite where you discuss that project, and also with the hiring manager and like all these different type of people. So I thought it was a very reasonable, pretty like fast process. And yeah, there was nothing unusual about it.
What was the project like?
So they don't use this project anymore, so I guess I can say what it was. It was essentially working on the user directory for Slack. If you go in, if your viewers at home use Slack, you can go and look at like a directory of all your users in a workspace. And so it gave you like a search, and then you had to like put in, like do some stuff with like offline mode, core data. I had to do like a huge like persistence core data stack. This is something you don't have to do for web development, is like persistent storage that's like beyond just like caching, but like, just a lot more intense sort of systems when it comes to like persistent storage. And then do like a networking library with that, some style guide stuff. But yeah, it's surrounded around Slack users. It was very reasonable. I spent so much more time on it than they expected, which is actually good. I know that everyone is like, oh, my project should take 3 to 4 hours. It's like, no, it does not. All of the projects are taking everyone like 8 hours plus. If they aren't taking people that long, then they're probably not doing a great job, or they're not going to pass because everyone else is putting in a ton of time. But like, the Slack one was a from scratch application, and just like the like the scaffolding of creating a project alone takes you 45 minutes to just like get it to where it should be so that you can start actually like building something really nice with like tooling and that sort of thing. But anyway, I felt like what I think is really great about take-home projects is that they teach you how and prep you for other interviews. So if you're doing that, your interview is essentially practice. And it's like, I think that that's way less nerve-wracking, at least for me. Like my take-home projects that I've done in my interviews have been some of the most important things to help me to get to on-site level at other companies, because they just, you're practicing, you're making sure that you remember things, because that's stuff you don't do very often is like early stage application development.
Yeah, and you have to like Google stuff, so you start learning my concepts you might get asked about. So yeah. It's good. It's a good refresher. So like working on Slack, that's an app that everyone is kind of using, relying on every single day. We work on anything where it was like, okay, like people need this, or it's crucial, or maybe if I push this code, like it's going to ruin this organization's communication. Any
all the time. Yes. Yeah, like the most important thing about Slack is stability, because at some point, like people are relying on it for them to do work, and so stability is one of the number one things that I as an engineer can provide. I mean, I worked on a whole host of projects at Slack. It was very fast paced. I ended up working on like a search input bar where the PM was like really insistent that we do like, you'd be able to copy and paste 1,000 names and they individually tokenize and search. 1,000. Yes. And it was just like, which it has since been deactivated because nobody was using it. But at the time it worked very perfectly. That was probably like the bleeding edge of, I think, what you can do on iOS, because it had to it's a search input bar. So like people have to be able to engage with it and type in it while it's like, resolving plain text into tokens that have people's images on them, and then those conflict resolutions. It was crazy. So that was a really interesting one. So that one, maybe I didn't have to focus as much on like the reliability, because I was pretty sure nobody was going to use it. But the thing that was most important to me on that feature was actually building something that people could reuse. So I saw it as not just like my external customers of like the people at Slack the people external from Slack who are pasting in names, but it's also, I built a search input bar that is now being used throughout the entirety of Slack. So when you use search like for invites and whatnot, that's what I built. So I saw it as like an opportunity to also engage with like something that other people can reuse, and that wouldn't have a lot of dependencies that were hyper specific to my use case. So my use case of pasting was like just a fraction of like the actual feature, which I was allowed to be like ported throughout the application. Slack is such a fun and interesting problem that people use in so many different ways, because everyone's workflow is different. And so just being really cognizant of everyone is truly a snowflake that is a like Slack user. And we really, I guess I left on Friday, so I guess it's not we anymore. But at the when I was there, every single person's like Zendesk ticket was taken highly seriously. I mean, whether you're like IBM or some free team, like everyone's problems are considered quite valid and like data points of like where we could do better. And so that was something that was really fantastic about working at Slack, is the engagement and that people had, and making sure that people had good, positive user experiences. And even when they had negative experiences, that they felt heard about them. It was important.
Yeah, it's a global company. Like whenever it has been down, which has been rare, you see all of Twitter like going crazy. So
yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like our users are incredibly vocal. And so it's also a self-preservation. Like if everyone's going to Twitter, like saying like something's going wrong, like that's a problem. There was a bug that like directly affected Jack Dorsey that I worked on. And I was like the iOS engineer working on it.
Him specifically.
Like, yeah, he was the one complaining about it. And I was like, so I was like terrified because I wanted it to, because, you know, I didn't want him to tweet about it and for it to escalate even further. And yeah, it's like, it really matters. People are vocal about their feelings. So you want to fix things to make people happy, but you also want to like make sure like you're going to be fine.
Yeah, no, that's pressure. Like if the CEO of Twitter is tweeting about it and you're like, oh damn, like that's what I built, like that's crazy.
Well, the great thing is like he thankfully didn't tweet about it, but it was like, you know, they back channel and they like say, oh hey, this is like happening, but it's like they could tweet about it. I use my Twitter to like hassle customer service all the time, so why like, you know,
Uber Eats gets harassed by me all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So eventually you end up leaving Slack and now you're going to a startup. So first, like what does a startup do?
Yeah. So I joined Whatnot, which is problematic because I say the word whatnot all the time. But essentially it is a live streaming platform for auctions, and with like a chat component. They are specializing in all things Funko Pops and Pokemon cards right now, where people go and auction off their things. But it's obviously meant to expand beyond those verticals. But I would, you know, it's always sort of feels passe to be like, it's this company mixed with this company, but it really is eBay for the TikTok generation. Like it really sort of, the people who are deeply successful on Whatnot are personalities unto themselves and are like known for auctioning off their collections, and like items that are being sold on Whatnot are going for higher than what they would sell like on eBay or just like if you were selling them on their own. So the streaming component really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's a completely different experience. Like it's crazy how commerce is changing right now because like with this, then you also have all these kind of like NFTs are popping up, and then I think I've been seeing a lot of them being sold on vCent for like Bitcoin and Ethereum and that's all great. So it's like, is your platform also like accept Bitcoin and crypto?
No, it's not.
That's the next step in going towards Gen Z.
Yeah, so I think for like Bitcoin, you would need to like pin it to a valuation. There's I'm so sorry. 1 second. The turn down people are here.
Turn down people.
All right, just a second.
Sorry. So anyway, the issue is that Bitcoin's valuation is consistently changing. And so if it's consistently changing, then the value of what you're buying is changing over time. And so I actually have a friend who's working on this problem pretty intimately. And they were just acquired to think about this by PayPal to allow people to focus on a Bitcoin valuation that like stabilizing that price so that people can use it. But yeah, I think that ultimately it's the reason where Whatnot really got me and why, you know, I get a good number of calls from recruiters, but what I found most interesting about them is I actually talked about this product when I was at Fashion Week a couple years ago. I have some friends who are more in like the fashion business. And so we were like hanging out and there was this like publicist from Korea and she was like, you know, there's this really big app in China that is all like people selling their clothes in their closet, but it's all video streaming and I really want to build it, but like put it with like a bent towards more of the Western audience. And it's essentially the same thing. It's like if I, you know, went through my closet, So I'm like maybe collect too many handbags. And so if I like went and started like going through my collection and like auctioning them off. So there's so many applications that you can have for this that are beyond, a much more like, Pokemon card type thing. So it's a very exciting idea. And they were just given a Series A of 20 million by Andreessen.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great investors also.
Yeah, very good investors.
So what's the name of the company in China? Is that Pinduoduo?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I saw some news about them recently. Yeah. So yeah, looking at like the startup life. So now it's back to kind of like no structure again.
Yeah, I'm their first iOS hire. Yeah, it's the exact opposite. I think that for me, I feel very ready for that experience, and very excited to like build a department. I've now sort of like had a lot of different managers over the years. I've had a lot of sort of experienced the things and like feel like I can give a really good and healthy direction to a company. But yeah, I'm very excited. The other thing that they're doing that is very interesting is that they already have an iOS app, but they're rewriting it in native iOS. And so my goal is to like get that to start it off on like a really great path based on what I've seen that are on really older applications, and some of the pitfalls that they've fallen into that end up being very time consuming in the future.
No, it's smart. You got to build the base. Like getting to technical debt is the worst type, especially these early stage.
Yeah.
So you don't want to get there. So we have a question from the audience. Jared is asking, how did you overcome imposter syndrome in your early coding days?
Oh, interesting. That's a hard one. I feel like I struggle with that still to this day. I think like coming at it from a really sort of like everyone has positive intent, I think is a really important thing. I think that especially when you're earlier on in your career, you just really want to be right. And you want to like you want people to respect you, and you don't want to just be right because that makes you feel good. It's because you want people to respect you and you want to be considered valued. And making sure that like you are value add and you're contributing in that type of way. And I think that I think getting over imposter syndrome is really about being willing to put yourself out there and be wrong. Like it's not about feeling more comfortable with being right. And so yeah, I think that that's one of the better things, because then once you start to have more like interesting conversations with people about like what you guys are building and really feeling like you understand and know something, then you can be more comfortable with sort of like multiple opportunities or multiple ideas of ways of building that. And I think that for me, like my like North Star, like idioms that I say of like engineering is like, don't fit a round peg into a square hole, or like everything is about trade-offs. Like those things are really true. Like not every single thing that or a piece of advice that you get is like, or technology you know about is the answer to the current problem that you are experiencing. And being like very comfortable with saying, hey, this is generally what you would do, but maybe we don't do this in this moment because of timelines, or it's just not a perfect fit. And then like understanding what those trade-offs are. So I think that you can combat imposter syndrome by being really open to like your peers and response and differing opinions, because it'll allow you to create better opinions. It'll allow you to feel more comfortable with why you feel something the way you do, instead of holding your ideas very dear.
Yeah, so just being authentic. So like you're not an imposter. You might be learning, but if you don't say it out loud, you end up making yourself look worse than you would otherwise.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly.
All right, perfect. So I always like to close on two main questions that bootcamp grads love to hear. So the first question is, if you're graduating from bootcamp today, what would be your game plan to get hired?
I mean, the same thing I did the first time, and I've done each time, which is, I mean, I would apply everywhere because every interview is practice for whatever the interview. There is no strategy for applying. Apply everywhere. Do it immediately.
Numbers up.
Yeah, like it's about creating a pipeline. It's not about there is no way of like being like, oh, well, I really want to do Google, and so I should do them 2 weeks after. Like when the companies are in their own timelines, you cannot predict them, and it has nothing to do with you. So you need to get practice. Practice is the most important thing. With that, cracking the coding interview. I think it's like chapters 1 through 4 and chapter 7, I think, on systems architecture. Those are do those, like sit down, learn those. Even if you never get those problems in an interview, it will allow you to start thinking very critically and tightening up your solutions. Only give yourself 30 minutes to like explore the problem in a more long-term way, and you'll get faster. But like as you get faster, start being like timed. 30 minutes, you're in an interview, you only have 30 minutes. Then I would say those are more the technical parts of it and mechanics. But then on a softer side, craft a narrative for yourself. Like, why are you here? Why are you talking to them? And like, you know, people want to work around other people who they find interesting and fun. So like, think about that, and, you know, feel good about who you are and also what you bring to the table. So create the pipeline though. That's the most important thing. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. And then other question is, what should every bootcamp grad be doing in the first year of their career?
Learning. Yeah, that's, I think I said it prior and like earlier in this interview, but your first year out of, as a new grad, is about learning, about setting the foundation for the future of your career. There's no time to waste. And every single person is a person you can learn from. One of my mentors specializes in machine learning, and he works on like Kubernetes and like all this backend stuff that I don't know anything about. But because I just wanted to like learn from him and I found him interesting, we've had like, I think he's been my mentor for like 3 or 4 years now. And he worked at Yelp. He's now at Airbnb. So you should really focus on building that foundation, and learning like solid engineering principles that will set you up for the future.
Well said. Well, there you have it. So thank you so much for joining us. If people want to find you and follow your work or kind of ask you a question, where's the best place?
Please reach out. So my email is laura@whatnot.com. And yeah, you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's a little bit more chaotic on my LinkedIn, and so sometimes I'm less responsive. Give me a week or two and I'll make sure I reach back out. So if you don't remember laura@whatnot.com, please reach out via LinkedIn.
Perfect. So there you have it, everyone. Laura Weaver, now a iOS engineer at Whatnot, which is a cool startup. So check that out. But otherwise, thank you so much for sparing your time, especially while you're skiing. So we definitely learned a lot.
No problem. It's my little après ski time, you know.
One way to relax. But yeah, thanks again, and good night, everyone. Until next week.